Texas Panhandle, 1882. The wind moved across the flats like a voice too old to shout, stirring ribbons of dust that shimmered under a dying sun. Dry cedar was half wood, half rust, and all exhaustion, its air smelling of sweat, iron, and cheap whiskey. Horses stamped against the hitching posts, their tails flicking dust from cracked hides. Somewhere down the street, the auction bell rang one last time, thin as a worn-out prayer. Silas Marrow turned his horse toward the sound, the brim of his hat shadowing eyes that had forgotten how to look for anything worth finding. In the pocket of his duster, a blue ribbon waited, soft from years of handling, harder from what it remembered. The crowd had thinned by the time he reached the square. Most of the buyers were already halfway drunk or halfway broke. The auctioneer barked prices no one cared to pay. A mule went for a bottle of rye, a wagon for less. Then came the girl. She stood barefoot behind the rail, rope looped around her wrist, hair in dark knots, dust in her eyes. A man with a red nose tugged the rope and lifted his bottle in salute. "Got me a quiet one," he slurred. "Don't talk, don't hear, eats little, works quiet, comes cheap." The men laughed, not kindly. One spat in the dirt. Another said, "Ain't right, sellin' folks like tack." Silas said nothing. He hadn't come for people, just for a horse too stubborn to die before winter. Still, something in the girl's stillness pulled him, like gravity. She looked straight at him, not pleading, not afraid, just looking, as if measuring what kind of silence lived in him. He turned his gaze away, jaw tight. He told himself she wasn't his problem, but the sound of rope scraping wood followed him through the dust. Juniper, the mare, stood trembling in the corral, ribs showing like ribs of the land. Silas stepped forward, laid a hand on her neck. "Easy now," he murmured, voice low as rain on tin. She shivered, then stilled. Behind him, the drunk barked a laugh. "You want the horse, mister? She comes with the girl. I ain't dragging her back." Silas straightened. "How much for both?" Laughter broke sharp around him. "You buying yourself a herd or a wife, Marrow?" He ignored it, counted coins into the man's filthy palm. Enough for a dying horse, not near enough for a life. The drunk staggered, half in thanks, half in mockery. "She's yours. Don't say I didn't warn you." Silas looked at the rope between them. Then he drew his knife. The blade caught what little light was left. One quick pull, and the rope fell. The girl didn't flinch. Her eyes followed the blade as it dropped into the dust. "Come on," he said quietly. She stepped forward, barefoot, each movement soundless as a prayer not meant for words. Behind them, the auction bell rang again, an echo thin as guilt. They left town as the sun bled out across the plains. The wagon creaked, the wind sang through the wheels, and the air smelled of rust and distance. The girl sat in the back, knees drawn up, her hand resting on the sideboard, feeling the road instead of watching it. Silas didn't look back. He told himself it was pity, that it'd last no longer than a meal or a night's rest. But pity wasn't what burned in his chest. Halfway home, the wind shifted cold. The sky dimmed from amber to bruise. He caught her reflection in the mirror of the wagon lamp, eyes steady, searching his profile like someone tracing a scar. "You hear me at all?" he asked over his shoulder. She didn't answer, but her fingers tapped 3 times against the board, slow, deliberate, like a heartbeat he couldn't ignore. When they reached the rise above the Marrow Ranch, the last light was red as a coal ready to die. The house below sat squat and tired against the horizon. Silas stopped the horse, feeling the world go still except for wind and the quiet hum of memory. His thumb brushed the blue ribbon in his pocket. A woman's voice ghosted through him. "Keep this land kind, Silas. Promise me that much." He breathed once, sharp, then shook it off. "You can work here if you want," he said. "Leave if you must." The girl looked up. Her lips moved. No sound. Just the faintest shape of a sentence. "I hear in other ways." The words, silent as they were, struck him harder than thunder. He turned back toward the road, hands gripping the reins. The wind eased, soft as breath. Behind him, she laid her palm flat on the wagon board, listening through her skin. The mare snorted, the wheels hummed, and the desert stretched open like a secret. Far off, thunder muttered over the plain. Distant, but coming. Evening loosened its grip on the town as the wagon rolled out, iron rims ticking over ruts filled with old dust. The road ran like a pale ribbon through mesquite and prickly pear, and the wind pressed from the north, thin and glass-cool. Silas kept the reins loose on Juniper, letting the mare find the easy line. In the box behind him, the girl, Mara, sat with her knees hugged close, one hand spread flat to the plank, as if she were reading a page no one else could see. They didn't speak, silence fit between them like a well-worn glove. Coyotes stitched their calls across the far draws. Somewhere a windmill turned slow and stubborn, each creak a counted breath. At the ridge the world opened. Everything below lay in layers of copper and ash. Fence lines, a low barn, the square-shouldered house, and the thin silver of cottonwood draw slipping through the grass. Silas pulled the team up and stood in the stirrups to ease his back. His thumb found the blue ribbon in his duster. The silk had a memory of its own, cool and steady, the color of sky after rain. He turned it in his fingers the way a man might turn a coin before placing a bet. He hadn't taken the ribbon out in years, not since the day under the cottonwoods, when his mother, hair braided and fierce, tied it to her own wrist and made him promise, "Keep this land kind." Then winter came hard. A drifter cut a steer, and Silas answered with a fist, a boot, and a word he told himself was justice. After that, the ribbon lived in his pocket like a grave marker. He looked back toward Mara. She was watching the hush spread over the ranch like light on water. When she saw the ribbon in his hand, something in her face softened. Not quite a smile, more the easing of a muscle that had been clenching too long. "Just cloth," he said. hearing the lie the instant it left him. Her fingers moved, two small motions, careful, deliberate. Promise, then remember. He didn't know how he knew, but he did. The shapes felt right in the air between them. He clicked to Juniper and set the wagon down the slope. Grass hissed along the wheels. At the gate, he climbed down and lifted the latch. The wire ticked against the post in a rhythm he didn't recognize. The wind had shifted, south now, warm as breath from a sleeping beast. On the yard, the day's heat lifted off the earth in shimmers. A hawk swung low and slid away toward the river. Silas led Juniper to the trough, loosened the breast strap, and rubbed the mare's neck while she drank. Mara climbed down barefoot, taking each board of the yard like she was listening for cracks. She stopped by the barn and laid her palm against the door. The wood hummed faintly under her hand. "Easy," he said. "The hinges bite." She glanced at him, then pressed her ear to her shoulder and felt the jam with her fingers. The smallest nod. Understood. He carried a lantern to the porch and struck a match. Flame rose inside the glass, turning the air honey thick. The house smelled of cedar shavings, old coffee, and saddle soap. On a peg by the door hung a canvas coat that hadn't been worn since rain meant anything. He set the ribbon on the shelf, just for a second, then tucked it back into his pocket, as if the room might steal it. "You hungry?" he asked. Mara touched her throat, then her chest, then nodded once. He ladled beans into a tin bowl, cut bread, and set both on the table. She waited, not out of fear, he thought, but out of some private rule about entering another person's hunger. When he nodded, she sat and ate small, even bites, like someone who knew the cost of carelessness. "Name?" he asked, tapping the table. "Mine's Silas." She took a sliver of charcoal from the hearth bucket, hesitated, then wrote on a scrap of brown paper, "Mara." The letters were careful, built as much by breath as by hand. Below it she drew a short line and wrote, "Marrow beside Silas," then looked at him. Not claim, not joke. A simple bridge laid across a narrow place. He cleared his throat. "You can stay. No questions tonight." He paused. "Work starts at first light." She nodded, then pointed toward the barn and lifted two fingers, bent, like legs of a horse. He understood. Juniper first. "Before coffee," he said. "That's a sin in these parts." The flicker at the corner of her mouth came and went like a moth. A sudden gust rattled the window. The lantern chimed in its hoop. He looked toward the yard and saw the dark mass of the cottonwood beyond the barn heave once and settle. For a heartbeat, he felt the old promise move under his ribs, a slow turning like a river against a rock. He showed her the lean-to room, a narrow bed, a folded blanket, a basin with water cool as iron. She stepped in without touching anything, then returned to the doorway, one hand on the frame, eyes tracking the corners of the ceiling, counting swallows' nests by their shadows. She raised two fingers and made a small circle downward, safe. He let out a breath he hadn't meant to hold. Back in the main room, he banked the fire and set the dishpan by the stove. She took it from him and washed the bowls without sound. Sleeves rolled, movements sure. The light from the lantern ran along the bones of her wrists like moon over stone. When she finished, she set the bowls upside down on the towel, palms resting a moment on the table to feel the grain. Outside, the wind stopped. Not eased. Stopped. Silence stood up in the yard. Then the barn door spoke. One long, low creak, wrong in pitch and measure, as if the hinge had learned a new language. Mara's head turned before his. Her hand lifted, palm open, listening. Somewhere far off, thunder coughed, and then swallowed itself. Silas reached for the rifle, then let it be. He took the lantern instead. "Stay behind me," he said. Mara stepped to his shoulder. They crossed the porch into air that smelled like dust waking to rain. The cottonwood hunched darker than the night. The door moaned again, softer, almost a question. Silas lifted the lantern. The light swung over latch and board, catching a shape that slid out of sight along the far wall. "Who's there?" he called. No answer. Only the sound of juniper stamping once, then holding still, as if waiting to be chosen. Dawn came thin and blue, the kind of light that moves slow across the floorboards before deciding to stay. The wind outside was quiet for once. Only the low murmur of cattle and the soft grind of a windmill filled the spaces between breaths. Inside, the smell of coffee and damp cedar drifted through the room. Silas Marrow sat at the table, elbows braced, staring into a tin cup steaming like an old secret. The girl, Mara Vale, was already awake. Her bare feet made no sound on the boards as she crossed from stove to door, sweeping dust into neat lines with a willow broom. She had washed, her hair damp and dark, pulled back with a small strip of twine. Each motion she made was certain, patient, as if she'd lived here for years, instead of a single night. Silas lifted the chalk slate from the shelf and wrote 3 words in thick, slow strokes. Water, fire, bread. He slid it across the table and tapped each one with a rough fingertip. "Learn these first," he said. She studied the shapes, then looked up. Her hands began to move, small, spare gestures, a twist for water, a flick for fire, a touch to the mouth for bread. He tried to mimic her, heavy and awkward. She laughed silently, the corners of her mouth breaking like sunlight through clouds. The soundless joy of it hit him harder than any word could. "Guess I talk too loud for my own good," he muttered. She tilted her head, then traced her finger in the air. Loud heart, quiet hands. He didn't know what to answer to that, so he poured her coffee instead. When she lifted the cup, her eyes closed for a breath, as if she could feel the warmth more clearly than most men could taste it. The faintest sigh escaped her lips. Not relief, but recognition. Outside, juniper snorted, hooves scraping wood. The mare's breath smoked in the chill. Silas set down his cup. "Stay here," he said. "She gets nervous when storms hang around too long." Mara followed anyway, the hem of her dress brushing against the doorframe. The barn was half shadow, half dust, the kind of quiet that holds its breath. Juniper rolled her eyes white at the sight of strangers, tail twitching. Silas stepped forward, voice steady, low. "Easy, girl." Before he could touch the reins, Mara moved closer. She knelt beside the horse, palm flat to the animal's flank. The mare shivered, then stilled, just like that. Her hand traveled the length of the leg, stopping where a faint swelling showed. She pressed gently, eyes half closed, feeling the rhythm of pain and breath beneath her skin. Then she dipped a rag into a bucket, wrung it out, and began to clean the wound, slow and sure. Silas stood there, arms crossed, watching. "You handle stock before?" She shook her head. Then she drew a small curve in the air, like wind across grass. "Listen." That's what it meant. He exhaled. "Maybe you do." When she finished, she looked up at him, palms open, showing faint dirt and sweat. He saw the scars then, small crescents along her knuckles, white as moonlight. They weren't new. "She listens," he said quietly, almost to himself. Mara nodded once, the simplest agreement in the world. They walked back to the house as sunlight broke through the ridge. The sky was the pale gold of forgiveness. For the first time in years, Silas thought the place didn't look entirely alone. He made breakfast, corn cakes, crisp bacon, black coffee, and set 2 plates without thinking. She sat, waiting for his cue again, but he only nodded toward the food. They ate in silence that didn't ache. The sound of the fork on tin, the hiss of wind through the shutters, these things filled the gaps where words failed. When the meal was done, Silas turned the slate toward her. "Your turn," he said. "Name." She took the chalk, hesitated, then wrote carefully, "Mara." The letters leaned slightly, graceful in their imperfection. Beneath them, she drew a small curve and a star, something like wind bending around light. He touched the chalk, tracing her name once with his finger. "Mara," he repeated. She smiled, then tapped his chest. He picked up the chalk and wrote, "Silas." Then she drew a short line between the 2 names, one clean stroke connecting both worlds. A hawk's cry cut through the air outside, sharp and far. Juniper shifted in her stall. Silas glanced toward the door. Mara watched him, then wiped the slate clean with her sleeve. In its gray smudge, she wrote 3 new words, "Storm coming soon." He frowned, looking toward the window. The sky was bright, clean as bone. "Sky's clear," he said. She only smiled, soft and certain. Her hand brushed the air. "Not here yet." The wind outside stirred once, carrying a whisper through the eaves, the kind that doesn't sound like warning until it's too late. He looked at her then, really looked. The calm set of her shoulders, the listening in her silence. Something in his chest shifted, like ground loosening before the rain. From the barn came the thud of a hoof hitting wood, off rhythm. Juniper again. The horse never lied about weather. Mara's eyes flicked to his, steady as the horizon. She lifted one finger and traced a single line in the air, downward, like falling light. "Storm, huh?" he muttered. Outside, somewhere far to the south, a low rumble began to roll. He almost smiled. "Guess we'll see who's right." But when the wind hit the door a heartbeat later, carrying the smell of rain not yet fallen, he stopped smiling. By noon, the sky turned white, so bright it burned the color off everything it touched. Heat rose from the earth in shimmering sheets, and the air smelled like copper and waiting. Silas Marrow stood by the corral rail, mending a post split by last week's wind. Each hammer strike landed slow, steady, deliberate. He worked the way some men prayed, quietly and with no promise of reply. From the porch, Mara watched him. Her sleeves were rolled, her hair tied back with a strip of cloth the color of dry sky. She had taken to the rhythm of the ranch as if she'd been born to it, feeding the mare, washing the tin, tracing the sounds of the place through her palms. The silence between them had grown comfortable, shaped like the wind itself, always there, always moving. Then came the sound of hooves, not the tired kind that belonged to workhorses, but the crisp cadence of law and polish. Silas turned, wiping sweat from his brow. Two riders came down the road, one in a gray vest too fine for dust, the other wearing the star of Sheriff Ruth Calder. "Morning, Marrow," the sheriff called. "We've business on your line." Behind her, the man in gray smiled like he'd rehearsed it. "Judge Hollis Bragg, district appointee," he said, dismounting with care. His gloves were pale, his eyes paler. "Beautiful property," Bragg said. "Shame about the confusion in your deed." Silas felt his jaw tighten. Confusion. Bragg unrolled a packet of papers. The pages crackled, thin, smug, self-assured. "Boundaries and water rights along Cottonwood Draw," he said. "Your father's claim seems to stretch wider than the law allows. I'm here to adjust the flow, so progress stays fair." "Progress," Silas echoed low. "Funny word for taking what isn't yours." Bragg's smile didn't flicker. "Nothing's taken, sir, only clarified. The land must serve all who drink from it. Cooperation is the cornerstone of civilization." From the porch, Mara stepped down, a pail of water in her hand. The sunlight caught the wet rim, throwing shards of light across the yard. She stood still, half-shadowed under her hat, eyes fixed on Bragg. He noticed her. Of course he did. Men like him always did. "And who might this be?" Silas set down his hammer. "Help. Help?" Bragg tilted his head. "Can she speak for herself?" Mara didn't move. Her gaze was steady, unsettling. She didn't flinch when Bragg's eyes searched her face like a map to be claimed. "She doesn't talk," Silas said. "Deaf?" Bragg asked, too casually. Silas didn't answer. Bragg's smile thinned, silk turning to wire. "Well," he said, "every man serves the law in his own way, and every silence serves something. Shall we proceed?" He tapped the papers with a gloved finger. Just a signature, Mr. Merrow. I'll file the rest. The sheriff cleared her throat, uneasy. Hollis, maybe give him time. Bragg ignored her. The line between ownership and greed can be thin. I suggest we keep it clean. Silas wiped his hands on his trousers. I'll look at it myself. Of course, Bragg said smoothly, folding the papers back. But don't let things linger. When boundaries blur, trouble seeps in. Water has a way of choosing its own path. He tipped his hat to Mara. Good day, miss. Her expression didn't change. But as he turned, her hand lifted, barely, 2 fingers brushing the air like a flicker of wind through grass. Silas couldn't tell if it was farewell or warning. When they rode off, the sound of hooves faded into the wide hum of noon. The world felt too still. Silas leaned on the fence post, staring at the dust the judge left behind. He means to carve the land, he said finally. Mara set the pail down beside him. The reflection of sky rippled inside it, warped by the heat. She knelt, dipped a finger into the water, and drew a line across the surface. Then reached for the slate resting on the porch rail and wrote, "Will he take it?" Silas hesitated. He'll try. She looked toward the fields, grass bending low, wind rolling slow. Then she wrote again. Will you fight? He almost smiled, tired. Not with bullets. She thought for a moment, then drew a short line between 2 dots, like a child's drawing of a fence. Under it, she wrote one more word, balance. He studied the chalk marks. Don't know if men like Bragg believe in that. Mara tapped the board once, firm. Then she rubbed the chalk with her thumb, smearing the word until it looked like smoke. Silas turned toward the barn, pretending to check the door hinges. But inside, something else moved. A thought, quiet and unwelcome. Maybe she heard more than any of them. When he came back out, she was gone from the porch. A moment later, her voice, not sound but shape, called him wordlessly from the corral. She stood by Juniper, one hand raised, pointing toward the horizon. A dark smear had gathered at the edge of the sky, moving against the wind. He frowned. Clouds don't roll north like that. Mara looked at him, eyes calm, certain. Then she signed, "Storm listens only to itself." He watched the horizon a long while before answering. So does the law. The wind came back all at once, dry and sharp. It carried the faint clang of wire along the fence, a note out of tune, trembling, like something alive. By late afternoon, the world held its breath. The sky was too clean, too still, as if waiting for a reason to break. The horizon shimmered under the weight of white heat, and every fence wire hummed a low metallic tune, the sound of the plains singing their warning. Silas Merrow worked the east line, tightening bolts on the corner post. His shirt clung to his back. His hammer made dull, lonely music against the wood. He worked the way some men prayed, quietly, and with no promise of reply. From the porch, Mara Vale watched him. The wind had turned strange, not coming from anywhere, only circling. She felt it on her skin, not cool or warm, just restless, like a heartbeat out of time. The slate rested on her lap. She'd been tracing small circles on it for the past hour, chalk turning to dust beneath her fingers. When Silas finally looked up, he saw her standing at the fence line, hair lifting in the faint breeze. Her eyes were on the sky, not on him. He walked toward her, wiping sweat from his brow. "Something wrong?" She didn't answer. Instead, she bent down, wrote on the slate, and held it out. "Storm coming soon." He looked at the words, then at the horizon. The clouds were far off, gray smudges against too much light. "Sky's clean," he said, half smiling. "You said that before." Mara met his gaze, steady as a nail set in oak. She lifted one hand, fingers fluttering in a slow spiral, wind turning under itself. He shook his head. "You sure it's not just wishing for rain?" She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't need sound to speak. Then she pointed toward Juniper. The mare had stopped grazing and now stood rigid, ears pinned, nostrils wide. Her tail flicked once, sharply, and then stilled. Silas frowned. "Well, damn." He laid his hand on the fence. The wire thrummed beneath his palm, vibrating with a rhythm too quick to be wind. He looked at Mara. "That what you heard?" She nodded once. He took a breath, let it out slow. "Maybe you've got the kind of ears this country respects." She wrote again. "Country talks to everyone. Most don't listen." Silas almost laughed, but the air caught in his throat. "Guess I'll start learning." The sky to the south darkened by degrees, blue to ash, ash to iron. The horizon bent under its weight. A low growl rolled through, the heat. Not thunder yet, just the warning before it. Silas gathered tools, eyes on the clouds. "We'll have to bring the stock in. If it breaks, it'll break fast." Mara moved beside him, light and sure, her hands already unhooking the gate latches. She didn't need words to understand the urgency. Dust rose around them, not from wind, but from pressure, as if the earth itself was drawing breath. By the time they reached the barn, the light had turned wrong, yellow and green at once, sickly and holy. The smell of rain was in it now, distant and electric. Silas stopped at the door, catching his breath. "That's no summer storm," he said. Mara picked up the slate again and wrote, "Light without warning, sound that arrives late." He read it twice. "You always talk in riddles?" She wiped the slate clean and smiled. "Truth takes time to hear." A gust hit the yard, strong enough to rattle the shingles. Dust spun up from the ground, swirling between them. The air crackled. The horses inside shifted restlessly, their hooves drumming the floor. Silas reached for the latch, but Mara's hand shot out, catching his wrist. She shook her head just once and pointed upward. The roof above them gave a soft groan. He waited. The sound passed. Then she nodded. "Now." Inside, the air was thick with heat and straw. He checked the stalls, fastened the side door, and turned to find her standing by Juniper again. The mare trembled, eyes rolling white. Mara laid her hand on the horse's neck, whispering something only the air could hear. Slowly, the animal quieted. When she looked back at him, Silas saw something in her eyes he hadn't before. Fear, yes, but also resolve. Like someone who'd learned too early that listening can save your life. "Stay close to the house when it hits," he said. She lifted her chin. "I stay where sound goes." The wire outside sang again. High, sharp, and wrong. Then the first drop of rain hit the roof with the force of a stone. Mara looked toward the horizon. A flash split the far clouds in silence. Silas's jaw tightened. "Lightning without thunder," he muttered. "That's bad ground." She turned back, her eyes catching what light was left. Her lips moved, soundless, but he knew the word. Now. He opened his mouth to ask what she meant, but before he could, the sky to the west flared white. The light came without sound. Then all at once the wind vanished, like the world had stopped breathing. Silas felt the hair on his arms rise. The mare stamped, then froze. Then the thunder came, not rolling, but cracking, the kind that tears air in half. He ducked instinctively, grabbing Mara's shoulder. She didn't flinch. She was staring past him, toward the cottonwood by the shed, eyes wide. Silas turned, just in time to see it happen. The old tree lit from root to crown, fire splitting its trunk. The ground shook. Sparks rained like golden hail. He pulled her down, covering her with his coat as splinters flew. The air filled with smoke and light. When the world stilled again, all he could hear was the frantic heartbeat under his own ribs, and hers, pressed against his chest. She looked up, eyes bright in the flash's fading glow. He could almost hear her breath form the word she never spoke. Listen. The storm didn't arrive. It descended. Rain came in fits first, like fists testing the door, then poured hard enough to blur the world into motion. Wind howled through the cottonwoods that were still standing, and the one-struck tree burned low, smoke curling up like prayer from a wound. Silas slammed the barn doors shut and dropped the timber brace across. His shirt was soaked through, the fabric heavy as regret. The lantern flickered against the walls, shadows swinging like restless ghosts. "Stay back," he said. Though Mara was already inside, hair plastered to her temples, eyes bright in the dim. Juniper thrashed in her stall, hooves pounding the boards. Mara went straight to her, palms flat, whispering nothing. Slowly, impossibly, the horse stilled. "You all right?" Silas asked, voice half drowned by the rain. She nodded once, then lifted the slate from the tool shelf and wrote, "Safe." He managed a breath that almost felt like relief. Then thunder cracked again, louder this time. So close the boards shivered beneath their boots. The smell of ozone and wet ash filled the air. He walked the barn, checking beams and latches. Water leaked through the roof, drops pattering onto straw like footsteps. His hand brushed a hanging bridle and came away slick with mud. When he turned back, Mara was watching him, still by the mare, the lamp glow softening her face into calm. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "Roof's not built for that kind of anger." She didn't move. Instead, she picked up a fragment of chalk from the dirt floor and wrote on the stall wall, "Light does not warn." He stared at it. "Guess not," he said, voice quiet. The wind hit again, bending the walls inward with a groan. Rain hissed through the gaps, soaking the straw. He grabbed a tarp, threw it over the feed, then crouched near her as another flash cut the night apart. The light poured through the cracks, painting her skin in silver. For an instant, she looked almost otherworldly, half lightning, half silence. The thunder followed late, rolling heavy and low, the kind that makes you feel small. He reached out before thinking, steadying her shoulder when the floor trembled. She didn't pull away. When the noise died down, he said, "Never seen a sky split like that." She turned to the wall, wiped her message clean with her sleeve, and wrote again, "I felt it before." He frowned. "Where?" She hesitated, then added beneath it, "Someone burned. Not me." He didn't ask more. Whatever that memory was, it didn't belong to words. Outside, the rain thickened, steady and merciless. The hours stretched. The lantern guttered, flame shaking every time the wind found a crack. Silas leaned against the doorframe, exhaustion pulling at his eyes. "Never thought I'd be grateful for company during a storm," he said. She met his gaze, steady, unreadable. Then she dipped her head toward the roof, listening. He followed her glance. The sound had changed. No longer rain, but a deeper rhythm, a kind of heartbeat running through the timbers. Mara lifted her hand, motioned for him to be still. The next flash came white and fast, cutting through the gaps in the boards. She moved toward the door. He caught her arm. "Wait!" But she shook her head and signed one word, "Now." He opened the brace just enough for her to slip out. The air outside was thick, humming like a struck wire. Smoke still rose from the split cottonwood, orange veins glowing faintly in the dark. Rain hissed as it hit the fire, turning steam into fog. Mara stepped closer to the tree, hand raised. The wind whipped her dress around her legs. She stood there, facing the ruin, her fingers moving slow and precise through the air, like tracing the memory of something sacred. Silas called over the noise, "You'll get yourself struck!" But she didn't move. Her hand touched the blackened trunk, and for a moment, the fire inside seemed to settle, dimming to ember instead of flaring. Then she turned, motioning him forward. He hesitated, then went. The storm broke around them, wind clawing his coat, rain stinging his face. He reached her side, looked down, saw what she was pointing at. The base of the tree had split clean through, leaving a narrow hollow still glowing faintly red. "Close call," he said, half under his breath. That beam would have come down right where I was. She looked up at him, eyes reflecting the ember light. Then she signed, slow and deliberate. You listened in time. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind had eased, the rain softening into a whisper. Smoke clung to their hair, their clothes, their silence. He looked at the ruined tree and then at her. Maybe that's what this land's been waiting for, he said. Someone who listens. She smiled faintly. The first true smile he'd seen from her. They walked back to the barn, the ground sucking at their boots. The storm was breaking apart behind them, its anger spent. When they reached the door, she stopped and turned. The wind brushed her hair across her face and she lifted her hand once more, tracing a small circle in the air, a mark of ending. Inside, the lantern burned low. He hung his hat on the peg and looked back out one last time. The cottonwood still smoked, a black silhouette against the gray dawn creeping in. Something inside him shifted, the kind of change that doesn't come from fear, but from surviving it together. Get some rest, he said. She wrote on the barn wall before leaving, safe is never alone. He read it, nodded once, and blew out the light. The storm left behind a silence so complete it felt carved, like the world had forgotten what sound was supposed to be. Morning came gray, wet, and slow. The fields shone like hammered pewter, each puddle holding a piece of the sky. Smoke still curled from the split cottonwood, its charred heart whispering heat into the mist. Silas Marrow stepped out from the barn, his boots sinking into mud that pulled at him like memory. The air smelled of rain and burnt sap. Somewhere in that stillness, the land seemed to be breathing again. He pulled his coat tight and glanced toward the house. Mara stood on the porch, hair damp, a shawl around her shoulders. In her hand was the slate, clean but for one word written small and neat. Still. He nodded. Yeah, he said softly. For now. A sound broke the quiet. The heavy, uneven rhythm of a horse struggling through mud. Silas turned. From the curtain of rain emerged a figure, hat low, coat dark and dripping. The horse stopped at the gate, nostrils steaming. The rider dismounted clumsily, boots sloshing in the muck. It was Boone Pike. The name came back with the smell of whiskey and gun oil. A man once known for trouble, now standing smaller than the stories told about him. He raised a hand in greeting or surrender. "Evenin', Crowford," he said, voice rough, trying for steady. "Didn't reckon I'd find you still here." Silas frowned. "You're late for regret, Boone." Boone laughed once, hollow. "Ain't here to fight. Not drunk enough for that. I come to warn you." He reached into his coat, drew out a small tin locket, and held it out like something burning. "You ought to see this." Silas didn't take it right away. Mara had come down from the porch, silent as a shadow, so slow. Her eyes fixed on the locket, the faint tremor of her hand betraying something deeper than curiosity. Boone looked from one to the other. "Judge Bragg's got your name tangled up with hers," he said. "Used me to sign it. Said it was for the town. water rights and whatnot. Truth is, he's setting up to own every acre that drinks from Cottonwood Draw. Silas stepped closer. And what's that got to do with her? Boone's mouth twisted. He said her name, Mara Vale. Said it was on an old claim. Used that to prove the land's tainted, to make it his. Silas's voice dropped. You signed that paper? Boone nodded once, eyes down. Drunk as a fool. Thought it didn't mean nothing. Then the storm hit, and I remembered. He shoved the locket into Silas's hand. Found this the day after you bought the mare. Figured it belonged to her. The locket was cold and light. When Silas opened it, a scrap of blue cloth lay folded inside. Same weave, same faded thread as the ribbon in his duster pocket. Mara reached out, touching it with 2 fingers. Her breath caught. Her eyes widened, not in surprise but in recognition. Boone saw it and looked away. Her mother's, maybe, he said. The drunk that sold her mentioned a woman named Vale down by San Vega. Guess I should have listened sooner. Silas closed the locket carefully. The metal clicked shut, final as a sentence. You're a fool, Boone, he said. Boone gave a dry smile. Wouldn't argue that. But even a fool knows when the wind's turnin'. Bragg's comin' for you. For both of you. He started to turn back toward his horse, then paused. The rain fell softer now, whispering against his shoulders. Don't thank me, he said. I owe worse than words can pay. Mara stepped forward, eyes on him, and made a small gesture, fingers brushing downward, a sign Silas didn't recognize. Boone stared for a long second, then nodded, as if he understood. He swung into the saddle and rode into the fog, the sound of his horse fading slow as forgiveness. Silas turned to Mara. The locket hung heavy in his hand. He tellin' the truth? She looked at him, then touched her chest and nodded once. Her fingers shaped another word in air. Mother. He opened the locket again, the faint thread trembling in the breeze. Then she and my ma. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The ribbon and the cloth told their own story. 2 women who'd made promises before the world learned how to break them. Mara pointed to the locket, then the ribbon, then drew a small line between them on the slate. Underneath, she wrote, Same thread. Silas exhaled, something loosening in his chest. Maybe that's what the storm meant to show, he murmured. But the peace didn't last. From down the road came voices, low, rough, gathering like thunder before it finds courage. Silas looked toward the sound. Lanterns flickered through the mist. 8, maybe 9 figures, walking slow, carrying sticks that glinted in the wet dark. Mara's hand tightened on the slate. She wrote quickly, They come. Silas moved to the porch, rifle untouched beside the door. He didn't reach for it. He stood there, shoulders square, jaw set. They won't find what they're looking for, he said. Mara watched him for a long moment. Then she lifted her hand, touched her chest, and signed something soft, something he didn't yet know. The rain steadied, turning the lantern lights into halos. A single drop slipped from the locket in his hand, hitting the wood with a sound that felt too much like a heartbeat. Night carried the smell of wet iron and fear. The rain had thinned to mist, but the ground still shone like glass beneath the lanterns that moved toward the Marrow Gate. Silas counted them. 8, maybe 10, each shape wavering in the fog. Men he'd known for years, men who'd helped him brand cattle, fix fence, share whiskey when the nights got too long. Now they came with torches wrapped in oil rags, fire hidden under their coats. Mara stood by the porch post, shawl drawn close, her face unreadable. The locket hung at her throat, glinting faintly with each pulse of light. She didn't ask what was happening. She already knew. Silas stepped down from the porch, boots sinking into the mud with a quiet, final sound. He didn't carry the rifle, just his hands, open, empty, steady. "Evenin', Withers," he said when the first man came into focus. "Didn't think you'd walk this far in the rain." Withers was old, gray-bearded, hat pulled low. He kept his distance, but not his voice. "We want her gone, Silas. Word's out she hears things no one ought to. Cattle dying, storms before they come. Ain't natural." "Neither's superstition," Silas said. Withers spat into the mud. "You don't know what she brought with her. I know she brought life back into this place." The men shifted, uneasy. One muttered something about witch signs. Another kicked at the ground, not looking up. On the porch, Mara lifted her slate. "I hear what the earth tells, not what men invent." She turned it for them to read. A low murmur rolled through the group. Some couldn't read the words. Others refused to. Withers's jaw worked. "She's a curse, Silas. Storm followed her here. You know it." Silas shook his head. "That storm followed me long before she did." He stepped closer to the gate. The mud sucked at his boots, a slow pull, but he didn't stop. "You want to be afraid, Withers? Go ahead. But don't call fear faith." Behind the men, someone struck a match, ready to light the first torch. The flare hissed in the damp air. Before it could take, another voice cut through. Clear, tired, but firm. "Put it out." The crowd turned. Sheriff Ruth Calder rode in slow, her horse's hooves splashing in shallow puddles. Her coat was unbuttoned, badge dull under the mist. "You light one fire," she said, "and you better be sure it's not your own barn that catches first." Withers hesitated. "Sheriff, you're just scared," she interrupted. "And I've seen what scared men do. Go home." The match fizzled in a hiss of rain. The torch never burned. For a moment, no one moved. Then, one by one, they began to back away. The sound of boots in mud replaced the hum of accusation. The lanterns flickered, dimmed, and disappeared into the fog. When only silence remained, Ruth dismounted and came to the gate. She looked at Silas. "You'd best keep your door locked tonight. Bragg's got them stirred worse than hornets." Silas nodded. "Appreciate you riding out." "Wouldn't call it a ride," Ruth said. "Call it prevention." Her gaze drifted toward Mara. "She all right?" Mara nodded once, signing, "Thank you." Ruth understood enough to smile. "Good. I like someone who doesn't waste words." She tipped her hat. "Try to rest, both of you. Morning's liable to come with paperwork." When she left, the quiet returned. But it wasn't the same quiet. It was heavier, as if the air itself remembered what almost happened. Silas went back to the porch, wiping rain from his face. Mara hadn't moved. She stood where she'd been, looking out into the dark where the men had vanished. He spoke softly. "They won't come back tonight." She looked at him, then raised her hand, drawing a small motion in the air, a spiral folding inward. "They will. But not the same way." He understood. The storm outside was only half of what was coming. The wind stirred the wet grass, carrying the faint cry of something distant. Not men this time. Not anger. A child's voice, sharp and frightened, echoing from the cedar grove east of the house. Silas's head snapped up. "You hear that?" Mara was already moving, barefoot through the mud, shawl slipping off her shoulders. The slate clattered from her hand, chalk scrawling one last word before it hit the porch. "Help." He grabbed his coat and followed, the lantern swinging wild in his hand. The air was colder now, the mist thick as wool. The cry came again, smaller, weaker. Mara stopped at the edge of the grove, hand pressed to the earth, listening not for sound, but for tremor. She turned east, pointed between two leaning trees. Silas ran ahead, boots splashing, heart hammering. "Where?" he called. She pointed again, sharper this time, and he saw it. A tiny shape under the bent branch of a fallen cedar. A boy, no more than 6, soaked and trembling, one foot twisted under him. Silas dropped to his knees. "Easy, son. You're all right." Mara knelt beside them, touched the child's chest, then his forehead. The boy's sobs eased, breath settling into rhythm. His hand found hers, small and shaking. The lantern flame flared once in the wet air, then steadied, casting light over 3 faces. The lost, the listening, and the man learning how to believe again. Dawn came slow, spreading a milk-colored light across the soaked prairie. The air was cold enough to taste. Dew clung to the grass like breath caught in prayer, and every step Silas took made a soft, wet sound that felt louder than it should. He knelt beside the fallen cedar, its branches heavy with rain, and brushed them aside to uncover the boy completely. The child blinked, mud streaking his face, lips cracked. "Mama," he whispered, barely sound, more memory than word. "She's close," Silas said, voice low and steady. "You're safe now." Mara knelt beside him, hand pressed to the boy's chest. She closed her eyes and seemed to listen, her head tilting slightly as if catching a tune beneath the surface of things. Her other hand moved to the boy's throat, gentle, measuring breath. Silas lifted the child into his arms. The boy weighed almost nothing. Bones, water, and a bit of life. "We'll take him home," he said. But Mara shook her head, motioning toward the east, where a thin trail of smoke rose from behind the ridge. She drew a quick shape on the wet earth. A cross beside a circle. Mission of San Vega. San Vega's 10 miles, Silas said. She pointed to the boy, then the ground, then pressed her hand flat against her heart. Time shorter than life. He nodded. All right then. San Vega it is. They set off down the narrow trail, Silas carrying the boy, Mara walking beside them, eyes scanning the horizon. The light shifted between silver and white, clouds drifting low. Every so often, Silas glanced at her, barefoot in the wet grass, shawl clinging to her shoulders, face calm despite the cold. He'd seen strong women before, but not like this. Not the kind that listened instead of fought, that felt instead of demanded. Halfway down the slope, a sound broke through the quiet, the rapid thud of hooves. Sheriff Ruth Calder rode up, raining hard when she saw them. "Hell," she breathed. "You two find him?" Silas nodded. "Under the cedars." Ruth swung down from her saddle and touched the boy's forehead. "It's Alma Withers's youngest. She's been tearing through the streets all night looking for him." Silas felt the boy stir in his arms. "He's alive. Just needs warmth. Then let's get him there." They rode double, Silas cradling the child against his chest, Mara sitting behind Ruth, her hands gripping the saddle horn. The wind cut through the morning, biting but clean. The mist burned away to reveal a wide, washed sky. When they reached the Withers place, Alma came running out, her skirt soaked, eyes red. She screamed her son's name before she saw them. When she did, she fell to her knees. Ruth slid off her horse and helped the boy down. He ran to his mother, limping but alive. She caught him, sobbing into his hair. The sound broke open the silence that had hung over the town since the storm. Alma looked up through her tears, eyes finding Mara first. For a long second, no one spoke. The woman's face twisted between shame and gratitude. Then she whispered, hoarse, "Thank you." Mara gave a small nod, her lips parting though no sound came. She placed her hand over her heart and bowed her head. The crowd that had gathered around, the same men who'd stood with torches the night before, lowered their eyes. No one said her name, but the air shifted, heavy guilt giving way to something cleaner. Ruth cleared her throat. "That'll be enough excitement for one night," she said. "Let's give them air." As the people drifted off, Silas lingered by the fence, watching Alma rock, her son. The morning light caught on the wet grass, turning every drop into a spark. He glanced toward Mara. She was standing by the gate, one hand brushing the cedar pollen from her sleeve, face unreadable. "You did good," he said. She wrote on her slate, "Earth led us." He smiled faintly. "Maybe it led you." She wiped the words clean and replaced them with, "You listened." Something in his chest eased. Something he hadn't realized was clenched. "Maybe I did," he said quietly. "About time." They turned back toward the ranch as the first real sun of morning broke through the clouds. The air smelled of rain's ending, sweet and raw. At the gate, Ruth rode up beside them again. "Silas," she called, tossing him a folded paper. "Bragg's been busy. Found something at the mission archives tied to your family name. I'll bring the rest by later." "What kind of something?" She shrugged. "Old deed, looks like. Water claim signed back in '56. Name on it rings familiar." Silas frowned, tucking the paper into his pocket. "Thanks, Sheriff." Ruth tipped her hat toward Mara. "Seems to me this town owes you both a better morning." Mara smiled, small and true. When they reached the ridge again, the ranch came into view, washed clean, everything gleaming. Silas stopped a moment, staring at it. "You ever think storms don't ruin things?" he said. "Just show what's worth keeping." Mara drew on the slate. "Storms don't change Earth. They reveal it." He nodded. "Yeah, guess so." As they walked the last stretch home, the church bell from San Vega rang in the distance, a single low note, drawn out and weary. Mara froze mid-step, her eyes widening slightly. "What is it?" Silas asked. She reached for the shamsun, slate, hand shaking just enough for him to notice. Slowly, she wrote, "Mother's name, same church." The bell tolled again, echoing across the empty field. By late morning, the air had turned sweet with the smell of wet wood and sun-warmed grass. Steam rose from the fences, curling and vanishing before it could decide which way the wind blew. Inside the house, Silas sat at the table, the folded paper Sheriff Calder had given him lying between his hands, like a question too old to answer. Mara moved quietly around him, refilling the coffee pot, wiping the window glass, her bare feet making no sound on the floorboards. She paused when she saw the paper, then looked at him. One brow raised, waiting. "Sheriff found this at San Vega," Silas said. "Old church record, she reckons. Water claim from before my father fenced the draw." Mara reached out, fingers brushing the edge of the envelope. The seal had been broken by rain. Inside lay a thin page, its ink brown and delicate. The words slanted like they'd been written by someone afraid the truth might blow away. Silas flattened it carefully. The top line read, "Mission of San Vega, 1856. Beneath, his father's name in looping black, Elias Marrow, followed by a second signature written smaller, tighter, M. Vale. He stared at it. "Vale," he whispered. "That name." Mara had already seen it. Her breath caught. Her fingers trembled as she traced the faded letters. She looked up at him, eyes wide with something that wasn't quite fear. She reached for the slate, wrote, "My mother." Silas swallowed hard. "Your mother signed as witness." Mara nodded, then wrote another line. "She promised water. Your father promised land." He leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. "Then they were trying to keep the draw open for everyone, not claim it." She erased the words, replacing them with, "Something changed. Someone took more." Silas ran a hand through his hair. "That someone was him, my father. He must have stretched the claim when the others left, when nobody was watching. Outside, the sun pressed hard on the wet fields. Juniper neighed once, restless. Mara wrote slowly, each letter trembling. It can be undone. Silas let out a short, helpless laugh. Undo 50 years of bad law? She met his eyes and wrote one word. Right. He looked down at the table, at the paper, the cracked ink, the ghosts of 2 signatures bound by time. You think I can set it right? She nodded, touching her hand to her chest. Not can. Will. He exhaled, the sound closer to a sigh than a decision. Then I'll do it. I'll fix the line, give back what's not ours. Mara smiled, small and certain. There was a knock on the door before he could fold the paper again. Sheriff Calder stepped in, hat in hand, face drawn, but not unfriendly. I thought I'd bring the rest, she said, laying down a worn ledger wrapped in oilcloth. Found it in the rectory chest. Page numbers match. Silas opened it to a page marked with twine. The handwriting was the same, steady, deliberate. His father's first claim, his mother's witness mark, and again that small, elegant script of M. Vale. Below the signatures, a note in a different ink read, Water divided according to mercy, not measure. He read it aloud. The words filled the quiet room like light pouring through a broken shutter. Guess they knew better than we did, Ruth said softly. Silas looked up at her. If I rewrite the deed, fix the boundary, will the law hold? She nodded. If you sign it before Bragg tries another angle, yes. Might even shut him down for good. Mara stepped closer to the ledger. Her fingers brushed the page, then the small ink smudge at the bottom corner, like a fingerprint caught between generations. Your mother stood with mine, Silas said quietly. All this time we were split by the same promise they tried to keep. Mara smiled faintly, eyes wet but steady. Her hand shaped a single word in the air. Together. He nodded, voice rough. Together, then. Ruth cleared her throat, half smiling. I'll bring the new deed tomorrow. Try not to let Bragg talk you out of it. Wouldn't dream of it, Silas said. When she left, the house fell quiet again. Mara lingered by the table, tracing the lines of the ledger with one finger. Sunlight spilled across the page, gold on old ink, making it look alive again. Silas picked up the blue ribbon from his pocket and laid it beside the paper. 2 threads, he murmured. Same weave, same promise. Mara untied the ribbon, split it in half, and placed one strip atop her mother's name. Then she pressed her palm over both pieces, closing her eyes. Outside, a soft breeze moved through the cottonwood stumps, carrying the faint smell of rain and ash. When she opened her eyes, she wrote one last line on the slate. Water remembers the hand that shared it. He read it, and for the first time since he'd come back to this land, he smiled without weight. Then let's give it back its name, he said. Cottonwood Draw, where promises hold. The church bell tolled again, slower now, gentler, as if approving, And somewhere in that long note, two old ghosts, Elias Marrow and Monsieur Vale, finally let go. Afternoon light drifted through the windows, soft as breath after confession. Silas Marrow sat at the kitchen table, the new deed spread open, ink bottle beside it. The ledger of San Vega lay nearby, his father's sin staring back through brittle pages. He dipped the quill and began to write, slow and sure. I, Silas Marrow, restore the boundary and right of water belonging to Cottonwood Draw. When the last word dried, he signed and exhaled. My father took, he said quietly. I give it back. Mara watched from the doorway, her braid tied with the halved blue ribbon. She stepped closer, laid her hand above his name without touching it. Her fingers moved in the air. Promise kept. He smiled faintly. Feels like a prayer. Outside, the creek murmured again, water finding its forgotten path. A horse approached. Sheriff Calder, coat damp with dust and rain. She dismounted, nodding. Paper ready? Silas handed her the deed. Done and sealed. She looked it over, eyes softening. This'll stand. Bragg can't twist what's already straight. At his puzzled look, she added, he sent a letter. Paid to fix the church roof. Said a man should mend what he cracked before judging another. She handed Silas an envelope marked with Bragg's seal. Inside was a small silver cross and a line written in fine, deliberate script. Let the water run true. The rest will follow. Mara touched the cross, tracing its edge. Balance, she signed simply. Ruth smiled. Funny thing about law, it forgets. You best keep copies. When she rode off, the world turned quiet again. Sunlight slid over the land, turning puddles into mirrors. Silas walked to the fence line, the breeze lifting his hair. He carried the locket cloth and the ribbon, tied them together to the new boundary post. There, he murmured. Water runs right again. Mara knelt beside him, pressed her palm to the earth. And hearts follow, her hand said. He looked at her, the light soft on her face. Reckon I believe that. The wind carried the steady whisper of the stream, a sound older than any man's promise. Overhead, starlings turned as one body against the fading sun. Silas turned to her. You'll stay? She didn't write. She only nodded, eyes shining like dusk on clear water. He smiled, voice low, Nuk che dung ke. The land answered with a hush so deep it felt like peace. The wrong was righted, the water home, the silence finally whole. Morning came soft as breath on glass. A thin rain fell from a sky the color of tin, silvering every roof tile of the Crowford Ranch. The air smelled of cedar and new earth, like the world had decided to begin again. Silas stood by the window, coat unbuttoned, watching drops slide down the pane. Behind him, the kettle sang, low and calm. At the table lay the new deed, bound with the blue ribbon and stamped with Father Vega's wax. Beside it, the locket rested open. The small scrap of cloth faded but clean. It felt less like paperwork now and more like a prayer written in ink. Mara moved quietly around the kitchen, her shawl brushing the floor, hair undone from sleep. Children's laughter drifted faintly through the rain, the town's little ones walking up from the road. Since the storm, Alma Reyes had begun bringing them here to learn signs from Mara. They came shy at first, stumbling through gestures, but their hands had grown quick and sure, their faces bright with the joy of being understood. When they arrived, Mara knelt beside them, her hands moving like soft wings. She taught them words that could be seen, not heard. Thank you, home, light. Their laughter filled the small house like birds after a long silence. Silas watched from the doorway, coffee in hand. You got a way of quieting the world, he said. Mara turned, smiled, and signed. The world listens if you do. When the children left, the air felt wide and still again. The rain thinned to mist. Silas sat at the table, unfolded a small note he'd written overnight. His handwriting was clumsy, but the words steady. I want to hear your heart, if you'll let me listen with mine. He slid the note toward her. Mara read it once, then again, her fingers tracing, each letter as though learning their shape by touch. She looked at him, eyes bright and uncertain. Then she reached across the table, laid her hand on his chest. For a heartbeat, neither moved. You already do, she whispered, the first words he had ever heard her speak. Silas froze, then laughed softly, not from surprise, but from something deeper. Relief, wonder, grace. He covered her hand with his own. Guess I just needed to listen long enough. Outside, thunder rolled far away. Not warning now, just distance. The wind carried the smell of wet sage and wood smoke through the open door. They stood by the window as the rain eased to a hush. Beyond the fence, juniper grazed, healed and calm, tail flicking lazily at the soft air. Water shimmered through the draw, running true along the boundary he had redrawn by hand. You belong here, he said quietly. Mara smiled, touching his sleeve. So do you. For a long while they said nothing. The land breathed with them. Rain on roof, fire low in the hearth, peace between them like sunlight behind cloud. The world outside moved again, gentle and sure. Out on the quiet plains, where wind and memory never truly fade, the story of Silas and Mara ends not with thunder, but with peace. Two souls who carried silence and guilt found in each other the courage to listen, not just with their ears, but with their hearts. The water runs true again, the land breathes easier, and love, patient, steady, and kind, remains. If this tale reminded you of someone you once knew, or a promise you once kept, we'd love to hear your story. Tell us what this journey stirred in you, the moments, the memories, or the lessons that still echo across time. Your words keep these stories alive, just like an old fire that never truly goes out. If you believe, as Silas and Mara did, that kindness can still heal what's broken, and that love always finds its way home, please give this story a like, subscribe to our channel, and share it with a friend who still believes in second chances. until we ride again under the wide western sky. May your days be calm, your nights gentle, and may someone, somewhere, always hear the heart you carry.